was 12 years old, my mother slit her wrists in front of me because I asked to go to a friend's birthday party, and as she bled into our kitchen sink, she made me promise I'd never try to leave her again. She survived that time, barely. While the paramedics worked on her, she gripped my hand with bloody fingers and whispered, "This is what happens when you abandon me." I spent 3 days in the hospital chapel, 13 years old and convinced I'd almost murdered my mother by wanting to go to a sleepover. When she came home, arm bandaged and eyes hollow, she made me sleep in her bed so she could hold on to me all night. "I need to know you're here," she said. "Otherwise, the darkness comes back." The rules formed quickly after that. I couldn't join clubs because staying late at school feels like you're choosing them over me. I couldn't have friends over because their energy disrupts our bond. Each boundary came with the same threat, sometimes spoken, sometimes just a gesture toward her scarred wrists. She kept razors displayed on the bathroom counter like weapons, reminding me what would happen if I broke her heart again. By 14, I was homeschooled and completely isolated. Mom said it was better this way, just us two against a world that didn't understand our connection. She'd have good days where she'd braid my hair and we'd watch movies, and I'd think maybe this was enough. But then I'd mention wanting to learn to drive someday, and she'd go silent. She'd lock herself in the bathroom and I'd sit outside the door, begging her to come out. She'd emerge hours later, showing me fresh cuts on her thighs. Practice cuts, she'd call them, for when you finally abandoned me for real. I attempted my first real escape at 15. I'd found a youth shelter address at the library and memorized it. One night while Mom slept, I packed a bag and made it to the front door, but she was sitting in the dark living room, waiting. "I felt you pulling away," she said calmly. Then she swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills in front of me. I called 911 and rode with her to the hospital, holding her hand while they pumped her stomach. When she woke up, she smiled sadly. "You did this," she said, "but at least you stayed to watch." After that, she installed bells on my bedroom door and windows. She'd test me randomly, pretending to hurt herself to see if I'd try to leave or just save her. I always chose to save her, but I was dying inside, suffocating under the weight of keeping her alive. I started writing goodbye letters I'd never send, hiding them in my textbooks. I tried to get away again when I was 16. Mom had fallen asleep after taking anxiety medication, and I thought I had time. I made it 3 blocks before a police car pulled up. Mom had called them, claiming I was mentally unstable. She'd shown them my hidden letters as evidence. As they drove me home, she texted me, "If you'd kept going, you would have found my body when you came back. I had the bath ready." That night, she showed me a new scar on her stomach. "I did this while you were gone," she said. She made me help her bandage it, narrating how she would have cut deeper if I'd made it another block. "Next time you leave," she promised, "I'll make sure I time it perfectly. You'll be free, but you'll be a murderer." I became hypervigilant, watching for signs she was spiraling. My entire existence became keeping her from the edge. When I caught her standing on our apartment balcony at 3 a.m., I didn't ask why. I just took her hand and led her back to bed. But then I got a scholarship to art school. Mom found the acceptance letter before I could hide it. She didn't say anything, just disappeared into the bathroom. I heard water running and pounded on the door. When she finally opened it, the tub was full and she was fully dressed. "I was practicing," she said, "for when you leave me." For weeks, she prepared me for her death like other parents prepare kids for college. She showed me her will, her funeral preferences, the note she'd leave absolving me of legal responsibility but not moral guilt. She bought a white dress to die in and hung it in the closet where I'd see it every day. The scholarship deadline approached. Mom stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped everything except watching me. She'd follow me from room to room, asking if this was the last time she'd see me make breakfast. She counted down days on the calendar with red X's. The night before the deadline, I found her in the dark kitchen with pills lined up like soldiers. "You're going to choose them over me," she said. I sat across from her, my acceptance letter between us. I told her I was declining the scholarship. Relief flooded her face. Then I told her the truth. I'd already accepted it. I was leaving in 1 week. This was goodbye. She didn't scream. She just started taking the pills one by one, maintaining eye contact. I called 911 immediately, but she kept swallowing. By the time paramedics arrived, she'd taken enough to unalive herself twice over. As they worked on her, she told them I'd forced her to do it. She'd recorded our conversation, edited perfectly to sound like I was goading her. The police arrested me while doctors tried to save her life. I sat in a holding cell, 18 years old, charged with coercion and attempted unaliving. Knowing whether she lived or died, she'd finally found the perfect way to keep me from leaving. The fluorescent lights in the holding cell hummed above me, casting everything in a sickly green tint. My hands shook as I pressed them against the cold metal bench. The officer who processed me had looked at me with disgust when he read the charges. Coercion, attempted unaliving. The words felt impossible, like they belonged to someone else's life. A guard approached and unlocked the cell door. He led me down a narrow hallway to a small interview room where a woman in a rumpled suit waited. She introduced herself as my public defender, spreading papers across the table between us. Her eyes scanned the police report while I sat frozen, still wearing the clothes I'd been arrested in. She explained that Mom was in critical condition. The doctors had managed to stabilize her after pumping her stomach, but she remained unconscious. The recording she'd made was being analyzed by the police. My defender's face grew more concerned as she read through the evidence. She asked me to explain everything from the beginning. I started with a birthday party when I was 12. The words tumbled out. The razors on the counter, the bells on my door, the white dress hanging in the closet. My defender took notes rapidly, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me. She told me the recording was damaging but not conclusive. Mom had edited it skillfully, but there were inconsistencies in the audio that suggested manipulation. However, the prosecutor was pushing hard, especially given Mom's current condition. If she died, the charges would escalate to unaliving. The arraignment happened the next morning. I stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, my defender beside me. The prosecutor painted me as a cold, calculating daughter who'd pushed a mentally ill mother to sewer slide. My defender countered with years of documented hospital visits, each one following my attempts at independence. Bail was set at $50,000. I had no one to call, no family beyond Mom, no friends after years of isolation. As they led me back to holding, my defender promised she'd work on getting me into a psychiatric evaluation program instead of jail. That night, a guard informed me I had a visitor. My heart raced, wondering who could possibly come see me. Through the reinforced glass, I saw a nurse from the hospital where Mom was being treated. She'd been there during several of Mom's previous attempts. She slid a piece of paper under the partition, a note from Mom. The message was short. "I forgive you for making me do this. When I wake up, we can start over. Just you and me, like always." The nurse watched my face as I read. She'd been instructed to report my reaction back to Mom, who had regained consciousness that afternoon. The familiar manipulation made my stomach turn. Even from a hospital bed, even after framing me for attempted unaliving, she was still pulling strings. My defender visited again the next day with news. She'd found a psychiatric expert willing to evaluate both Mom and me. The evaluation would focus on something called enmeshment trauma and coercive control. She explained these were recognized patterns of abuse, though rarely seen to this extreme. The evaluation process began immediately. Dr. Martinez met with me in a small room at the detention center. Unlike a police interrogation, her questions focused on patterns rather than the single incident. She asked about my earliest memories, about boundaries, about the difference between love and control. Over several sessions, I described the gradual tightening of Mom's grip, the way she trained me to anticipate her needs, to read her moods, to exist solely as an extension of her. Dr. Martinez took careful notes, occasionally nodding with recognition. She'd seen similar cases, she said, though none quite this severe. Meanwhile, Mom had begun her own evaluation at the hospital. My defender kept me updated on her condition, physically stable but psychiatrically complex. Mom was telling the doctors I'd been planning to abandon her for months, that I'd cruelly teased her with threats of leaving. She claimed the recording proved I'd pushed her to take the pills, but the hospital staff had started noticing things. Mom refused treatment unless they promised to keep me away away. She threatened to hurt herself if they didn't update her on my legal situation hourly. When a nurse mentioned I might be released on bail, Mom pulled out her IV and had to be restrained. Dr. Martinez submitted her preliminary report to the court. I wonder what Mom's real game is here with that carefully edited recording. She planned this whole thing down to the smallest detail, didn't she? The way she had that white dress ready and counted down days with red X's makes me curious about how long she's been setting up this exact trap for her daughter. She diagnosed me with complex PTSD resulting from years of emotional hostage taking. She noted that my actions on the night of the incident, calling 911 immediately, trying to get help, were inconsistent with someone trying to cause death. She recommended intensive therapy, but not incarceration. The prosecutor wasn't convinced. They had Mom's recording, her testimony from the hospital bed, and years of what they saw as a troubled relationship. They offered a plea deal: admit to reckless endangerment, serve 6 months, and submit to supervised release after. My defender advised against taking it. She believed we could win at trial, especially with Dr. Martinez's testimony, but she warned me it would mean facing Mom in court, hearing her testify against me, reliving everything in public. The trial would take months to schedule, months I'd spend in detention unless we could arrange bail. Then something unexpected happened. A social worker from one of Mom's previous hospitalizations came forward. She'd kept detailed notes about Mom's threats to harm herself if I ever left. She'd documented Mom's admission that she used sewers light attempts to control me. These records had been sealed, but the social worker felt compelled to speak up when she heard about my arrest. My defender filed a motion to dismiss based on this new evidence. The judge scheduled a hearing. I was transported to the courthouse in shackles, past reporters who'd gotten wind of the unusual case. In the courtroom, I saw Mom for the first time since that night in the kitchen. She was in a wheelchair, pale and thin, an IV still attached to her arm. She looked at me with such perfect hurt and betrayal that for a moment I felt the familiar guilt rising. Then I noticed the way she angled her bandaged wrists toward the judge, the calculated tremor in her hands. The social worker testified first, reading from her notes. Mom had told her explicitly that she would rather die than let my daughter abandon me. She described her sewers light attempts as the only way to keep her close. The social worker had tried to intervene then, but Mom had refused further treatment. Dr. Martinez testified next about the psychological dynamics at play. She explained how Mom had created a trauma bond, using intermittent reinforcement and the threat of self-harm to maintain control. She described my actions not as criminal, but as the desperate attempts of an abuse victim to gain freedom. When Mom took the stand, she wept softly. She told the judge I'd always been troubled, that she'd sacrificed everything to care for me. She claimed the social worker had misunderstood, that Dr. Martinez was biased. She played the victim perfectly, just as she always had. But then the prosecutor asked her about the recording. They'd had it professionally analyzed, and the edits were clear. Mom's face went still. She admitted to editing it, but claimed she'd only removed unnecessary parts. When pressed, she couldn't explain why those parts were unnecessary. The judge called a recess. My defender squeezed my shoulder, optimistic about how things were going, but I felt hollow. Win or lose, I was watching my mother destroy herself to destroy me. The guilt was suffocating, even though I knew it was exactly what she'd conditioned me to feel. When court resumed, the judge addressed Mom directly. He'd reviewed all the evidence, including her extensive psychiatric history. He noted a pattern of escalating self-harm coinciding with my attempts at independence. He observed that even now, in court, she was attempting to manipulate through emotional displays. The charges against me were dismissed. The judge ordered Mom to undergo mandatory psychiatric treatment and issued a restraining order preventing her from contacting me. As the bailiff unlocked my shackles, Mom began screaming that I was unaliving her, that she wouldn't survive without me. They wheeled her out still screaming. The last thing she said was, "You'll regret this when you find my body." My defender drove me to a shelter that specialized in family trauma survivors. I had nothing. No clothes, no money, no idea how to exist in a world without Mom's constant presence. The art school scholarship was gone, the deadline passed while I sat in jail, but I was free. For the first time in 6 years, no one was threatening to die if I made my own choices. That first night in the shelter, I lay awake waiting for the guilt to crush me. Instead, I felt something else, a tiny spark of anger, real clean anger at what had been done to me. The shelter connected me with a therapist who specialized in enmeshment trauma. In our first session, she told me something that changed everything. Your mother's life is not your responsibility. It never was. I broke down completely. Years of carrying the weight of her survival, of believing I was keeping her alive, came crashing down. The therapist held space for my grief, not just for the mother I was losing, but for the childhood I'd never had, the person I might have been. Over the following weeks, I learned to recognize the difference between love and manipulation. I discovered that real love doesn't hold you hostage, doesn't demand you sacrifice your entire existence. The other residents at the shelter shared their own stories of escape, and I realized I wasn't alone. Mom was transferred to a long-term psychiatric facility. My therapist helped me understand that this was the best possible outcome. She would get real help, and I would get the chance to build a life. The restraining order meant she couldn't contact me, though she tried through third parties. I got a job at a coffee shop, my first real interaction with the world in years. Every normal thing felt like a miracle. Choosing my own schedule, making friends with coworkers, deciding what to eat without worrying if my choice would trigger a crisis. The coffee shop became my sanctuary, but Mom found ways to reach me even with a restraining order in place. 3 weeks after my release, handwritten letters started arriving at the shelter, forwarded through her psychiatric facility's mail system. The staff couldn't legally stop her from writing, only from contacting me directly. Each envelope bore different handwriting. She'd convinced other patients to address them for her. I brought the first batch to my therapist without opening them. She helped me understand that reading them would only pull me back into Mom's web. Together, we developed a system where the shelter staff would collect any mail from her and store it unopened. The pile grew daily. My coworkers at the coffee shop noticed my hands shaking whenever someone who looked like Mom entered. One morning, a woman with similar hair ordered a latte, and I dropped an entire tray of mugs. My manager, Victoria, helped me clean up without asking questions. She'd hired several shelter residents before and recognized the signs of someone rebuilding their life. The psychiatric facility called the shelter repeatedly, leaving messages about Mom's deteriorating condition. She'd stopped eating again, they reported. She was refusing medication. The staff emphasized they were only informing me as her next of kin, not requesting I visit. My therapist helped me practice the phrase I'd repeat to myself: her choices were not my responsibility. 6 weeks into my new life, I encountered Mom's sister at the grocery store. I hadn't seen my aunt in years. Mom had cut off her family when I was young, claiming they didn't understand our bond. My aunt's face crumpled when she saw me. She abandoned her cart and rushed over, pulling me into a fierce hug. She explained that Mom had been calling her from the facility, begging her to find me. My aunt had refused, having watched Mom's manipulation for decades. She gave me her phone number and made me promise to call if I needed anything. As we parted, she mentioned that Mom had done similar things to her when they were young, though never to this extreme. My defender called with updates about the legal aftermath. The prosecutor had officially dropped all charges, and the arrest would be expunged from my record. She also warned me that Mom's psychiatrist had been pushing for family therapy sessions. I had the right to refuse, she reminded me. The restraining order was still in effect. At work, I slowly learned to interact with people normally. A regular customer named Nathaniel started chatting with me during slow afternoons. He was a graduate student at the local university, always ordering the same black coffee while grading papers. Our conversation stayed light. Favorite movies, the weather, his students' amusing essay answers. I treasured the normalcy of it. The shelter had a curfew, but within those boundaries, I experienced freedom I'd never known. I walked to the library and checked out books Mom would have called poisonous to our connection. I watched movies she'd banned for promoting abandonment. I ate food foods she'd forbidden because they might make me sick and need care from someone else. 2 months after my release, the psychiatric facility sent an official notice through my defender. Mom had been placed on a psychiatric hold after a serious self-harm attempt. She'd managed to hide razor blades in her room. The facility's director wanted to discuss upgrading her to a more secure unit. My defender attended the meeting on my behalf, making it clear I wouldn't be involved in Mom's care decisions. My therapist introduced new coping techniques as the guilt waves hit. She taught me to recognize Mom's voice in my head, criticizing every choice I made. When I bought a new shirt, I heard Mom saying I was wasting money that could go toward her care. When I laughed with coworkers, I heard her accusing me of being happy while she suffered. Slowly, I learned to separate her voice from my own thoughts. The art school scholarship was gone, but Victoria mentioned that the local community college offered art classes. Mom's playing courthouse theater like she's going for an Oscar, but the judge sees right through her bandage-waving performance, and those crocodile tears aren't fooling anyone with half a brain today. I enrolled in a basic drawing course, paying with my coffee shop earnings. The first time I picked up charcoal in class, my hands trembled. Mom had always said my art was our special thing, that I only had talent because of her nurturing. But as I drew, I felt something inside me that was entirely mine. 3 months into freedom, I moved from the shelter into a small studio apartment with 2 other former residents. We'd pooled our resources to afford the deposit. The night I signed the lease, I had my first panic attack in weeks. What if Mom found out where I lived? What if she hurt herself because I'd taken this step toward independence? My roommates sat with me until the panic passed, sharing their own stories of learning to live with the guilt. Mom's letters kept coming, now through a lawyer she'd somehow retained. He sent formal requests for me to visit, to participate in her treatment, to provide family medical history. My defender responded to each one, citing the restraining order. The lawyer then tried arguing that Mom's mental state made the restraining order cruel and unusual. A judge dismissed his motion. At the coffee shop, Nathaniel and I developed an easy friendship. He never pushed for information about my past, seeming to understand I was rebuilding from something difficult. When he mentioned his university had a support group for trauma survivors, he left the flyer on the counter without comment. I started attending meetings, finding strength in other stories of escape. The psychiatric facility reported that Mom had begun telling other patients I'd died. She wore black and held elaborate mourning rituals in the common room. When staff corrected her, she'd insist they were lying, that I'd unalived myself because of guilt over abandoning her. The facility social worker called my defender, concerned about Mom's break from reality. 4 months after my release, I received notice that Mom's psychiatrist wanted to pursue a competency hearing. If she was declared incompetent, the state would appoint a guardian to make her medical decisions. The court would first attempt to locate family members. My defender filed paperwork stating I was unable to serve due to the history of abuse and the standing restraining order. My aunt agreed to attend the hearing in my place. She called me afterward, her voice shaking. Mom had been lucid during the evaluation, manipulating the assessors with practiced ease. She'd convinced them she was improving, that she understood her past behavior was wrong. The psychiatrist recommended against the competency ruling. Mom would remain in the facility, but would retain her legal rights. At my therapy sessions, I processed the fear that Mom would manipulate her way out of treatment. My therapist reminded me that the facility staff were trained professionals who'd seen manipulation before. Still, I installed extra locks on my apartment door and varied my route to work. The hypervigilance I developed living with Mom served a different purpose now, keeping her away rather than keeping her alive. 5 months into my new life, Nathaniel invited me to a university art show. I hesitated, remembering Mom's rules about social events, but I went, wearing the new dress I'd bought with my own money. The student artwork was beautiful and diverse, nothing like the narrow style Mom had insisted I pursue. I stood in front of an abstract piece, feeling possibilities open up inside me. The psychiatric facility implemented new protocols after Mom was caught hoarding pills again. She'd been pretending to take her medication, then hiding the pills to stockpile for another attempt. The staff instituted mouth checks and room searches. Mom responded by going on a hunger strike, demanding to speak with me. The facility didn't contact me this time. They'd learned. My community college art instructor, a kind woman named Professor Stewart, noticed my tendency to destroy my work before completing it. She asked me to stay after class one day. Without prying, she explained that many students came to art with voices telling them they weren't good enough. She encouraged me to finish one piece, just one, and see how it felt. I spent weeks on a charcoal drawing of a bird taking flight. 6 months after gaining freedom, I received a subpoena. Mom was suing to have the restraining order lifted, claiming it violated her rights as a parent. My defender assured me this was standard. Many abusers tried legal channels when other methods failed. She prepared me for the hearing, warning me that Mom would likely appear transformed, playing the role of a reformed mother desperate to reconcile. The hearing arrived faster than I wanted. I sat in the courtroom, my aunt and Victoria beside me for support. Mom entered in a modest dress, her hair neatly styled, looking nothing like the woman who'd swallowed pills in front of me. She'd gained weight in the facility, and her scars were hidden under long sleeves. She looked at me with such perfectly crafted longing that spectators might have believed her performance. Mom's new lawyer argued that the restraining order was excessive, that it prevented necessary family healing. He presented letters from Mom expressing remorse, certificates from therapy programs she'd completed, and testimony from a facility counselor who believed she'd made progress. The counselor, young and earnest, clearly wanted to believe in redemption. My defender presented the history methodically, the sewer slide attempts, the recordings, the years of documented abuse. She showed photos of Mom's self-inflicted wounds, read from the threatening letters she'd sent through other patients, and presented testimony from Dr. Martinez about the severity of the trauma bond. The judge listened carefully, occasionally glancing between Mom and me. When Mom took the stand, she wept delicately. She spoke about her own mental illness, how she'd never meant to hurt me, how she'd only wanted to love me too much. She claimed the sewer slide attempts were cries for help, not manipulation. She promised she'd changed, that she just wanted to apologize and let me go. Her performance was flawless. During cross-examination, my defender asked Mom about specific incidents. Mom's answers were carefully crafted to admit partial responsibility while maintaining her victim status. She couldn't explain the edited recording, but suggested her mental state had been compromised. She acknowledged the harm she'd caused, but insisted it came from love, not malice. The judge asked me if I wanted to speak. I'd prepared a statement with my therapist, but standing there seeing Mom's calculated performance, I set it aside. Instead, I described the bells on my door, the razors on the counter, the white dress in the closet. I explained how she'd trained me to read her moods, to exist only as her emotional support system. I spoke about the freedom I'd found and how even now, 6 months later, I still checked exits wherever I went. Mom's composure cracked as I spoke. Her tears became real, angry. She started to speak out of turn, telling the judge I was lying, that I'd always been troubled. Her lawyer tried to quiet her, but she continued, her voice rising. She said I owed her everything, that she'd sacrificed her whole life for me. The mask slipped completely when she declared that if I didn't come back, she'd find a way to make me pay. The judge maintained the restraining order and extended it for 5 years. As the bailiff escorted Mom out, she stared at me with naked hatred. The look was almost a relief. It was honest, without the manipulation. My aunt squeezed my hand as we left the courthouse. Victoria drove me home, where my roommates had prepared a small celebration dinner. That night, I finished my charcoal drawing of the bird. Professor Stewart had been right. Completing something felt different than destroying it. I hung it on my apartment wall, the first piece of art that belonged solely to me. My roommates admired it over breakfast, and I didn't hear Mom's voice criticizing the shading or composition. Work at the coffee shop continued to ground me in routine. Nathaniel started bringing his study group on Wednesday evenings. I learned their names and coffee orders, feeling like a normal person with normal interactions. When one of them mentioned needing art tutoring, Nathaniel suggested me. I hesitated, then agreed. Teaching someone else helped me reclaim my own knowledge. 7 months into into freedom, the psychiatric facility sent word that Mom had been transferred to a more secure wing after another serious incident. She'd convinced a new patient to smuggle in pills, promising to share them. The attempt had been caught, but it showed her continued manipulation of vulnerable people. The facility increased her supervision and restricted her interactions with other patients. My therapist and I worked on building a life beyond survival. We set goals, completing my art class, saving money, maintaining friendships. Each achievement felt monumental. When I received an A on my final project, I cried in Professor Stewart's office. She handed me tissues and a flyer for advanced classes, telling me I had real talent worth developing. The coffee shop promoted me to shift supervisor. The small raise meant I could afford better art supplies and start saving for future classes. Victoria taught me scheduling and inventory management. I discovered I was good at creating systems, probably from years of managing Mom's moods. The skills that had kept me trapped now helped me build stability. 8 months after escape, I ran into the nurse who delivered Mom's note in jail. She was at the coffee shop with friends, and her face went pale when she recognized me. After her friends left, she approached the counter. She apologized for participating in Mom's manipulation, explaining she'd been new and hadn't recognized the patterns. She'd since received training on emotional abuse dynamics. The nurse showing up at the coffee shop right when everything's settling down feels pretty convenient. What are the odds she'd walk into this exact place months later? Her whole apology seems rehearsed, like she practiced this moment, and I'm curious why she really felt the need to approach after her friends left, instead of just leaving quietly. My aunt invited me to family dinners, introducing me to cousins I barely remembered. They welcomed me carefully, understanding I was learning to trust. My youngest cousin, an artist herself, offered to share her old supplies. Sitting at their table, passing dishes and sharing stories, I glimpsed what family could have been. The grief for what I'd missed mixed with gratitude for what I was finding. Nathaniel's study group adopted me as their unofficial barista. They included me in conversations about their research, their struggles with advisors, their academic dreams. When Nathaniel mentioned the university had scholarships for non-traditional students, he left the application on the counter like he'd done with a support group flyer. I took it home and spent weeks staring at it. The restraining order didn't stop Mom from trying indirect contact. She had other patients write letters, their handwriting shaky from medication or illness. The messages were always the same: how much she loved me, how sorry she was, how she was dying without me. My defender collected them as evidence in case Mom tried legal action again. The stack grew thick in her files. 9 months into freedom, I submitted the scholarship application. My essay about overcoming adversity felt too raw, too honest, but Professor Stewart encouraged me to tell my truth. My transcripts were limited, but my community college grades were perfect. My art portfolio showed growth from tentative sketches to bold, completed pieces. Nathaniel and Victoria wrote recommendation letters. The psychiatric facility's reports became routine. Mom cycled through manipulation tactics, hunger strikes, medication refusal, elaborate lies to new staff. She'd convinced one counselor I'd been kidnapped by a cult, another that I was being held against my will. When those stories fell apart, she tried new ones. The facility's director assured my defender they recognized the patterns. My therapy sessions spaced out to bi-weekly, then monthly. The crisis phase had passed, replaced by the longer work of building a life. I still had panic attacks, still heard Mom's voice criticizing my choices, but I had tools now. My roommates knew to check on me if I stayed in my room too long. My coworkers understood when I needed to step outside during busy shifts. 10 months after escape, I received the scholarship letter, full tuition to the university, plus a stipend for supplies. I sat on my apartment floor, holding the paper, unable to process it. My roommates found me there an hour later, still staring at the acceptance. They pulled me into a group hug, reminding me I'd earned this myself through my own work and talent. Mom learned about the scholarship somehow, perhaps through social media, perhaps through extended family. The facility reported she'd had her worst episode yet, barricading herself in her room and threatening to hurt herself if they didn't let her call me. The staff followed protocol, removing dangerous items and increasing supervision. She spent a week in the secure ward, sedated and monitored. I started university in the fall, 11 months after gaining freedom. The campus felt enormous after my small world with Mom. I got lost repeatedly, asked for directions, slowly learned to navigate both the buildings and the social landscape. My professors treated me like any other student, unaware of my history. I treasured the anonymity, the chance to be just another person learning and growing. Nathaniel remained a steady friend, introducing me to his wider circle. They included me naturally, inviting me to study sessions and cheap dinner gatherings. When I mentioned never learning to drive, they took turns teaching me in the university parking lots. Each normal experience felt like reclaiming pieces of the life Mom had stolen. The 1-year anniversary of my escape approached with unexpected weight. My therapist warned me about anniversary reactions, how the body remembered trauma even when the mind tried to move forward. I took a day off work, spent it with my aunt's family. We didn't talk about Mom or what had happened. We just existed together, cooking and laughing and being normal. That night, I created my first self-portrait. Not the idealized version Mom would have demanded, but honest, showing the exhaustion around my eyes, the tension in my shoulders, but also the beginning of something like hope in my expression. Professor Stewart selected it for the student showcase. Standing in the gallery, watching strangers observe my work, I felt visible in a way that didn't depend on Mom's need. The psychiatric facility sent fewer updates as Mom's patterns became predictable. She cycled through the same manipulations, each less effective than the last. New staff were warned about her tactics during orientation. She'd become a teaching case for recognizing coercive control. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd wanted to be special, and she was, just not how she'd intended. My university classes challenged me in ways community college hadn't. I struggled with critique sessions, hearing criticism as Mom's voice telling me I wasn't good enough. But my professors were patient, teaching me to separate constructive feedback from emotional manipulation. Slowly, I learned to hear their words without Mom's filter, to grow from critique instead of crumbling under it. 13 months after escape, Mom's lawyer sent a final letter. She wanted to sign over her rights to any property we'd shared, to formally separate our legal ties. My defender reviewed the documents carefully, ensuring no hidden traps. It was straightforward. Mom relinquishing any claim to parenthood, essentially disowning me legally. I signed without hesitation, making official what had been true for years. The coffee shop threw me a small party when I completed my first year of freedom. Victoria had hired 2 more shelter residents, and I helped train them, recognizing their hypervigilance and careful movements. I shared what had helped me, the routine, the normal interactions, the patient understanding. Watching them slowly relax into safety reminded me how far I'd come. My art evolved as I did. The birds I'd drawn escaping cages gave way to abstract pieces about transformation. Color returned to my work. Mom had preferred I work in black and white, saying color was too emotional. Now I experimented with bold reds and peaceful blues, learning my own aesthetic preferences. Each piece moved further from her influence. 14 months into freedom, I went on my first date. A fellow art student had been gently persistent, inviting me for coffee, then lunch, then a museum visit. I'd deflected for weeks, terrified of letting anyone close. But eventually, supported by my therapist and friends, I agreed to dinner. We talked about art and movies, nothing deep. It was perfectly ordinary and therefore extraordinary. The psychiatric facility implemented new policies based partly on Mom's case. They required additional training on manipulation tactics and family trauma. Mom had become what she'd never wanted to be. Ordinary, predictable, just another patient with patterns the staff recognized. Her special bond, her unique connection, had been reduced to symptoms in a textbook. As my second year of freedom began, I noticed the hypervigilance fading. I still checked exits but didn't map escape routes. I could shower without listening for Mom's movements. Sleep came easier, without nightmares of her standing over my bed. The body was learning what the mind knew, that I was safe, that she couldn't reach me, that her choices weren't my responsibility. My grades at university reflected my growing confidence. Professors nominated me for advanced programs, scholarship extensions, exhibition opportunities. Each success felt like proving Mom wrong. She'd said I was nothing without her, that my talent came from her nurturing. But here I was, creating and succeeding entirely on my own terms, with my own voice. The 2-year mark approached with less weight than the first anniversary. I was busy with finals, work, a life that had expanded beyond survival. Mom was just a monthly note in my therapist's files, a reason for certain coping mechanisms, a part of my history but not my present. The restraining order had 3 years left, but I rarely thought about it anymore. My defender called with final updates. Mom had stabilized in the facility, no longer actively self-harming but still refusing to acknowledge her behavior as abusive. She'd created a narrative where I'd abandoned her for selfish reasons, where she was the victim of an ungrateful child. The staff let her maintain this fiction as long as she followed facility rules. It was the closest to peace she could manage. I graduated with my associate degree from community college while pursuing my bachelor's at university. The ceremony felt significant, proof of building something from nothing. My aunt's family filled a whole row, cheering embarrassingly loud when I walked across the stage. Nathaniel and my coffee shop friends waited with flowers afterward. I had people now, real connections built on mutual care rather than manipulation. That summer, I moved into a new apartment, alone for the first time. The freedom to decorate entirely by my own taste, to establish my own routines, to exist without considering anyone else's needs, felt revolutionary. I hung my art on every wall, bought colorful throw pillows Mom would have hated, played music she'd have called disruptive. The space was entirely mine. My therapist suggested we move to quarterly sessions. The acute phase had long passed, replaced by ordinary life with ordinary problems. I still carried the trauma, would always carry it, but it no longer defined my days. We'd built strong enough foundations that I could handle most situations with the tools I'd learned. Knowing she was there if needed was enough. The coffee shop expanded, and Victoria offered me an assistant manager position. Victoria offering that assistant manager position proves that sometimes the best plot twist is just life getting steadily better. No dramatic rescue needed, just someone recognizing you've grown from surviving to actually thriving in the most wonderfully boring way possible. It meant more responsibility, but also more stability, better pay, benefits. I accepted, grateful for how far I'd come from the terrified girl she'd hired 2 years ago. Training new employees, especially those from difficult backgrounds, became my favorite part of the job. Mom faded to background noise in my life. The facility sent routine updates I rarely read. She was stable, contained, no longer an active threat. Sometimes I'd catch myself checking over my shoulder or jumping when someone who looked like her passed by. But mostly, I lived. I created art, maintained friendships, went to work, attended classes. Normal life, which had once seemed impossible. As the restraining order's halfway point passed, I realized I'd stopped counting days since escape. Mom was just a fact of my past, like a childhood illness that had left scars but no longer caused active pain. The hypervigilance had mostly faded to normal urban caution. I could think about her without the crushing guilt or paralyzing fear. She'd wanted to be my everything, and she'd become almost nothing. My art thesis project explored themes of freedom and constraint without directly referencing Mom. The abstract pieces showed transformation, growth, the beauty of becoming. My advisor praised the emotional depth, unaware of its source. The exhibition opening drew a decent crowd. Standing among my work, surrounded by friends and chosen family, I felt complete without her for the first time. The facility's final report noted that Mom had aged significantly, the years of self-harm and stress taking their toll. She rarely mentioned me anymore, focusing instead on manipulating newer staff members with different stories. The director assured my defender she'd remain in long-term care indefinitely. There was nowhere else for her to go, no one else willing to take responsibility for her. The facility's report stopped mentioning me entirely. Mom had shifted her focus to a new patient who'd arrived with her own daughter issues. I learned this through my aunt, who still received occasional updates from the facility's social worker. The manipulation tactics were identical, Mom offering motherly comfort while slowly creating dependency. The staff intervened quickly, having learned from our case. My university workload intensified as I entered my final year. Advanced studio courses demanded more complex projects, pushing me beyond comfortable techniques. One assignment required collaborative work, something I'd never done. My partner, a sculptor named Marcus, noticed my difficulty sharing creative control. We worked through it slowly, me learning to trust another artist's vision alongside mine. The coffee shop faced financial difficulties when a chain store opened nearby. Victoria called a staff meeting, presenting the numbers honestly. We brainstormed solutions together, extended hours, new menu items, community events. I suggested art nights where local artists could display work. The idea grew into monthly showcases that brought new customers and strengthened our neighborhood presence. Mom's lawyer attempted one final legal maneuver. He filed a motion claiming the restraining order prevented Mom from accessing necessary medical information about family history. My defender recognized the tactic immediately, using legitimate-sounding medical needs to create contact. She responded with documentation showing Mom had never provided accurate medical history anyway, often inventing conditions for attention. During finals week, I discovered Mom had been transferred to a different facility 2 hours away. The original facility needed her bed for acute cases, and Mom had stabilized enough for a less intensive setting. The distance felt like additional protection, though I knew geography had never stopped her before. Still, 2 hours was harder to bridge than 20 minutes. My thesis project evolved into an installation about boundaries. I built translucent walls that viewers could walk through, each passage revealing new perspectives. Professor Stewart suggested submitting it to the university's annual exhibition. The selection committee accepted it, scheduling my piece for the main gallery. I spent weeks adjusting lighting, ensuring each angle conveyed the intended message about barriers that both protect and isolate. Nathaniel defended his dissertation the same week as my exhibition. His research on trauma's effect on memory resonated with my own experiences, though he didn't know my history. I attended his defense, watching him field questions with confidence. Afterward, his committee congratulated him on passing. We celebrated at the coffee shop, our usual study group toasting his success with Victoria's experimental lattes. The exhibition opening arrived on a Thursday evening. I stood near my installation, watching strangers interact with the boundaries I'd created. Some pushed through quickly, others hesitated at each translucent barrier. A few stepped back entirely, choosing to observe from outside. Each reaction felt valid, reflecting different relationships with personal boundaries. My aunt brought several cousins to the opening. They moved through the installation together, supporting each other through the passages. One cousin mentioned it reminded her of leaving an abusive relationship, the walls you build for protection, the courage required to step through them. I hadn't shared my story with her, but art had communicated what words couldn't. Professor Stewart introduced me to a gallery owner interested in emerging artists. He walked through my installation twice, taking notes. Before leaving, he handed me his card and mentioned an upcoming group show focused on psychological landscapes. The opportunity felt surreal, my work in an actual gallery, not just university spaces. 3 weeks before graduation, the new facility called about Mom. She'd been caught trying to manipulate staff into calling me, claiming a medical emergency. When that failed, she'd attempted to forge legal documents granting her phone privileges. The facility director wanted to document the incident for her file. I authorized them to handle it without my involvement. Victoria offered me full-time management at the coffee shop after graduation. The position included health insurance and enough income to maintain my apartment while pursuing art. I accepted immediately, grateful for stability that allowed creative freedom. She mentioned eventually opening a second location, possibly with gallery space attached. Graduation day arrived with unexpected emotions. I'd imagined this moment during the darkest times with Mom, when any future seemed impossible. Now I stood in cap and gown, surrounded by classmates who'd become friends. My aunt's family filled 2 rows, having grown as more cousins cousins heard about the ceremony. Their presence felt like reclaiming the family Mom had tried to erase. The ceremony proceeded with standard speeches about futures and possibilities. When they called my name, I walked across the stage on steady legs. The diploma felt solid in my hands, evidence of years rebuilding from nothing. In the crowd, I saw Victoria, Nathaniel, and his study group cheering. Professor Stewart smiled from the faculty section. After the ceremony, we gathered at a restaurant my aunt had reserved. The conversation flowed naturally around career plans, summer trips, normal family discussions. No one mentioned Mom or the past. I existed in the present moment, just another graduate celebrating with loved ones. The normalcy felt like its own achievement. That evening, I returned to my apartment alone. The walls displayed my artwork from 4 years of growth. Each piece marked a stage of healing, though viewers would see only aesthetic evolution. I sat with my diploma, remembering the girl in the holding cell who thought her life was over. The distance between then and now felt vast and microscopic simultaneously. The gallery owner contacted me the following week about the group show. He wanted 3 pieces exploring psychological boundaries. I had 2 months to prepare, with installation planned for late summer. I spent evenings after work sketching concepts, each more ambitious than the last. The opportunity to show outside university felt like another wall becoming permeable. Mom's birthday passed without incident. In previous years, I'd been consumed with guilt, wondering if she was alone, if she was safe. This year, I worked a normal shift, had dinner with roommates, and created art until midnight. The date held no special power anymore, just another square on the calendar. My defender called with news that Mom's lawyer had withdrawn from her case. He'd cited irreconcilable differences, legal code for recognizing manipulation. Without representation, Mom's options for legal harassment narrowed significantly. My defender kept the file active just in case, but she believed the legal battles had finally ended. The coffee shop's art nights grew into community events. Local musicians performed while artists displayed work. I coordinated logistics, finding unexpected joy in creating space for others' creativity. One night, a young woman approached me after displaying her paintings. She mentioned staying at the shelter, trying to rebuild. I shared what had helped me, watching recognition flicker in her eyes. Summer arrived with its own challenges. The university apartment lease ended, requiring me to find new housing. I searched for weeks, eventually finding a small house with 2 other artists. The space included a sunroom perfect for painting. We signed the lease together, another step toward the life I was building. Moving day felt significant. I packed belongings accumulated over 2 years of freedom. Art supplies, books, clothes chosen by my own taste. Each box represented choices Mom never allowed. My new housemates helped carry everything, joking about artists having too many half-finished projects. Here's something peculiar. The facility just happens to need Mom's bed right when she's become stable enough for a transfer 2 hours away. That timing feels awfully convenient, especially with her lawyer suddenly withdrawing too, citing those vague, irreconcilable differences that could mean anything really. The casual camaraderie felt precious. The new house needed work. We spent weekends painting walls, fixing leaky faucets, making the space ours. I chose bright colors for my room, the opposite of the beige Mom had insisted promoted calm. Each brushstroke felt like claiming territory, creating a space where I controlled the environment. My first piece for the gallery show explored the concept of inherited trauma. I built a sculpture from mirrors that reflected at angles, showing how pain could distort and multiply across generations. The second piece used fabric to represent emotional boundaries, some torn, some mended, some reinforced with visible stitching. Each artwork pushed my technical skills and emotional processing. The psychiatric facility sent what would be their final update. Mom had been classified as a permanent resident, requiring lifelong care. Her manipulation attempts continued, but with decreasing sophistication. Age and medication had dulled her sharpest edges. She no longer mentioned me, focused instead on controlling her immediate environment. Meal times, medication schedules, television privileges. I started dating the sculptor from my collaboration project. Marcus understood artistic temperament without knowing my history. We spent evenings in his studio or mine, working separately but together. He never pushed for emotional intimacy I wasn't ready to give. The relationship developed slowly, built on shared creative understanding rather than desperate need. The gallery show opened on a humid August evening. My 3 pieces occupied a corner of the space, part of a larger conversation about psychological landscapes. Strangers studied my work, reading artist statements that revealed nothing personal. They saw universal themes where I processed specific trauma. The anonymity felt protective and freeing simultaneously. Several pieces sold opening night, though none of mine. The gallery owner assured me this was normal for emerging artists. He mentioned keeping my work up for the full month-long show. I watched red dots appear next to other artists' work without envy, grateful just to be included in the conversation. Victoria's second location became reality faster than expected. She'd found a space that included room for rotating art displays. I helped plan the layout, ensuring good lighting and sightlines. We discussed featuring recent graduates and shelter residents, creating opportunities for those rebuilding. The project felt like extending the lifeline I'd once needed. My cousin got engaged that fall, planning a small wedding for spring. She asked me to create something for the ceremony, not traditional wedding art, but something meaningful. I spent months on a piece about chosen family, about bonds created through love rather than obligation. The process helped me understand my own relationship to family, both lost and found. The restraining order renewal date approached. My defender filed the paperwork automatically, expecting no challenges. Mom hadn't attempted contact in over a year, seemed settled in her permanent placement. The judge renewed it without requiring my appearance. 5 more years of legal protection, though I rarely thought about needing it anymore. Work at both coffee shops kept me busy through winter. I trained new employees, managed schedules, coordinated art events. The routine felt nothing like the hypervigilance of my youth. This was structure I'd chosen, responsibilities I could leave at closing time. Home meant art and rest, not monitoring someone else's moods. My relationship with Marcus deepened gradually. He met my aunt's family at holiday dinners, fitting naturally into our gathered chosen family. We discussed moving in together eventually, but neither rushed. I'd learned to recognize the difference between healthy partnership and codependency. What we built felt sustainable, based on individual wholeness rather than mutual need. The gallery owner offered me a solo show for the following year, 6 months to prepare a cohesive body of work exploring themes of my choice. I accepted immediately, then spent weeks paralyzed by possibility. Professor Stewart, now a mentor rather than teacher, reminded me that art didn't require explicit autobiography. Truth could wear many masks. Spring arrived with my cousin's wedding. The piece I'd created hung in the ceremony space, abstract forms suggesting connection without constraint. During the reception, relatives I'd reconnected with shared stories of their own struggles. Everyone carried hidden weight. My survival story wasn't unique, just particularly dramatic. The universality felt comforting rather than diminishing. Mom turned 60 in the facility. The staff reported she'd requested a cake, celebrated with other long-term residents. She'd created a version of family from those around her, establishing hierarchies and alliances within institutional constraints. The pattern felt familiar but distant, like recognizing weather in another country. My solo show preparation consumed evenings and weekends. I explored themes of transformation, boundaries, inherited patterns, and chosen futures. Each piece pushed technical and emotional limits. Marcus offered feedback when asked, but respected my process. The work felt like excavation, uncovering layers I'd buried for survival. The coffee shop's 5th anniversary coincided with my 3rd year of freedom. Victoria organized a celebration combining both milestones. Regular customers shared memories, local artists displayed work, musicians played. I moved through the evening greeting people, accepting congratulations on my upcoming show. The normalcy of it all still sometimes took my breath away. 2 weeks before my solo opening, I received a letter from the facility. Mom had experienced experienced a medical event, a minor stroke that affected her mobility but not cognition. They'd included me as next of kin for notification only. No decisions required, no visits expected. I filed the letter with other documents, feeling nothing beyond mild acknowledgement. The solo show opened on a clear Thursday evening, the gallery filled with faces I'd come to know. Professors, coffee shop regulars, shelter workers, chosen family. My pieces lined the walls, each representing stages of a journey viewers could interpret through their own experiences. I stood surrounded by work that existed because I'd survived to create it. Marcus brought his parents, introducing me as his partner and a talented artist. They moved through the exhibition thoughtfully, asking questions about technique rather than meaning. Their easy acceptance felt like another small miracle. I had a partner's parents who saw me as myself, not as an extension of their child. Several pieces sold that first night. The gallery owner discussed commission possibilities, future shows, building a career. I listened while watching my aunt corner potential buyers, proudly explaining her niece's talent. Her enthusiasm embarrassed and warmed me equally. This was what family could be, choosing to show up, to celebrate, to support without consuming. The exhibition's final week coincided with the anniversary of my arrest. 4 years since I'd sat in a holding cell, certain my life was over. Now I stood in my own gallery show, surrounded by evidence of rebuilding. The date passed without fanfare, marked only by a quiet dinner with those who'd helped me survive. My defender sent a final email. The statute of limitations on various legal actions Mom might pursue had passed, combined with the restraining order and her permanent institutionalization. I was as legally protected as possible. She suggested we close the active file, keeping documents archived just in case. I agreed, another chapter officially ending. The facility social worker called once more. Mom had stabilized after the stroke but required increased care. She'd been moved to the medical wing, would likely remain there. Her manipulation attempts had decreased to minor complaints about food and television schedules. The complex woman who'd once orchestrated elaborate emotional terrorism had diminished to a difficult patient requiring basic care. I signed a lease on a studio space with 2 other artists. The warehouse provided room for larger installations, experimental work. Marcus helped move equipment, understanding this wasn't distance but expansion. I needed space to create beyond apartment constraints. The studio felt like claiming professional identity, not just surviving, but building. My 4th freedom anniversary arrived quietly. I worked a normal shift, had dinner with Marcus, spent the evening in the studio. No fanfare or reflection, just another day in a life I'd built from nothing. The ordinary evening felt like the greatest victory. Not that I'd survived something extraordinary, but that I'd achieved something beautifully mundane. Mom existed somewhere in a medical wing, creating small dramas among staff who knew her patterns. I existed in a world she'd never touch again, surrounded by chosen connections and self-created meaning. We'd both gotten versions of what we'd wanted. She'd never been abandoned, and I'd never been trapped. The cost had been everything, but the price was finally paid. The restraining order would expire eventually. Mom might outlive it, might not. Either way, I'd built a life she couldn't destroy, filled with people who knew me without knowing my story. Every piece of art, every normal day, every chosen connection was proof that survival could transform into something more. Not healing, some wounds don't heal, but growth around the damage, like trees that incorporate scars into their rings, marking time and endurance. I stood in my studio as spring arrived again, working on pieces for another group show. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Inside, I created from a place of wholeness Mom had tried to prevent. Each brushstroke, each completed work, each ordinary moment was its own quiet revolution. I'd wanted freedom. What I'd found was life. Time really does fly when you're out here building a life that actually feels worth living, not just surviving. Thanks for letting me tag along for the ride. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.